All right. Good morning, everybody. I hate to interrupt the visiting, but we'll go ahead and get started this morning. How are you? Everybody survive the ice? Yeah, that's all right. Eventually, attention will turn this way. Everybody survive the ice. No major catastrophes for anyone. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. That's what Christy and I were telling our connection group on Sunday. That like we found out that we still like each other. We were stuck in the house for 4 days, and it's like, oh well, I'm not completely irritated by you. That's awesome. So yeah, if you ever need a test for your marriage relationship, I guess get stuck in ice for a while. I don't know. So does anybody know what huge event is coming up this Sunday? No. Yeah. I mean, there's some kind of football game or something, but it's Super Sunday at Flagstone. Oh yeah, the toilet bowl with the teenagers. That's right. But don't forget to bring some soup and I guess bring your spoon. Be ready to enjoy some soup this Sunday. But then there is a big football game, huh? What? Everybody's sitting there with their spoons. I'm ready. I don't know. Can you walk by each pot with your own spoon? That's called double dipping, right? You're not allowed to do that, are you? Especially after COVID, I guess you're not allowed to do that anymore. So, yeah, just little samples. Just Can you do that with? Can you do that with soup? Oh, but can't you get yeah, anyway. All right. Okay. I'm excited to see how you're going to accomplish that. But maybe it's top secret. Maybe they don't want to share their recipe. I don't know. Yeah. I know. You open this can, you plop it in a pot, and you turn the heat on, and it magically makes soup. So, so your response was first you have to mess up some no-bake cookies, and then you put caramel on them. How funny. Okay, but it is. I don't know. There's apparently at least on professional radios and TVs and stuff, you can't use the words Super Bowl because you get sued by the NFL or whatever TV station is hosting. So it's the big game. So I don't know if any of you in this room or anybody online even cares about the Chiefs and Eagles game on Sunday, but I thought I'd start us off this morning with just some questions about the Super Bowl. Not about, this has nothing to do with any of the teams, none of these questions are football related. I'll put it that way, except for the fact that they revolve around the Super Bowl. Okay. First question: does anybody know what company? What company makes the Super Bowl trophy, the Lombardi Trophy? It's a famous jewelry company, Tiffany's. Tiffany's makes the Super Bowl trophy every year. Probably so. And which I did find out about that. Each team usually buys around 150 rings for all the players and managers and everybody. But yeah, the trophy weighs 7 pounds. Average cost right now is about $50,000 to make it. So, who was the first singer to perform at a Super Bowl halftime show? A little bit before Beyonce. The first singer to perform at a Super Bowl, 1970. Yeah. Prince is, no. Yeah. Did you really? Yeah, it was always like marching bands and floats and stuff like that. Person, person. No, it's not Neil Diamond. Not Willie Nelson. Female. Yeah. 1970. You want me to tell you? Tammy Wynette? No. No. It was it was Carol Channing. I know. Isn't that weird? Carol Channing performed during the halftime show. Yeah, Daisy and Brandon are both going, I don't know who that is. Yeah. Yeah. 1970, man, that was a long time ago. Um, Approximately, I don't know what your dishes of choice are when you're watching the game or not watching the game or whatever. But approximately, how many pounds of guacamole are eaten by Americans on Super Bowl Sunday? Yeah. Just how many pounds of guacamole across the country? Across, you're not even close. You're not. Oh my gosh. 43.8 million pounds. It has become the most popular dip for Super Bowls. 43.8 million pounds of guacamole this Sunday. Holy cow. All right. How many? This isn't pounds. This is the number. How many chicken wings are consumed on Super Bowl Sunday? No, it's even higher than that. Yeah. 1.3 billion chicken wings will be consumed this Sunday. I don't know. It didn't specify. That's a good question. I didn't find out for sure. Boneless or bone in, I'm not sure. Okay, well, 1.3 billion chicken wings. How much will Americans spend on beer Super Bowl Sunday? Ironically, $1.3 billion is what they'll spend on beer Super Bowl Sunday. So Jason Mosley should make his salary. He should do all right this weekend. How much did a ticket to the very first Super Bowl cost? No, the first Super Bowl was 65, 66, somewhere around there. Huh? No, you're way too high. You were closer, Sherry. $12. The first Super Bowl was $12. So this year, how much does a ticket to the Super Bowl cost this year? It's more. I haven't said average yet, just how much. I mean, but the cheapest up in the nosebleeds is anywhere between $4,000 and $5,000. Up in the nosebleeds. The average is $9,000. Oh, it'll be packed. It'll be packed. Yeah. Yeah. So for the price of a nice used car, you and somebody else can go to the Super Bowl. No. I would love to, but there's no way that I'm. Yes, for sure. If somebody handed me a ticket, I'd go in a heartbeat. Absolutely. But I'm sure there's a lot of companies and. Yeah, there you go. Okay, one more question. Who sang the longest national anthem in Super Bowl history? First of all, if you sing the national anthem just the way it's written, I mean, what are you talking? 45 seconds, maybe? I mean, it's not that long of a song. Who sang the longest national anthem in Super Bowl history? It wasn't Mariah Carey. That's a good guess, but it wasn't Mariah Carey. Mm-mm. Now, she was a halftime show. I don't think she sung the national anthem. No? No. But she's probably got the most iconic one. That's the one that's embedded in. I still remember that. Huh? I don't even know who's doing it this year. Is it? Okay. So the longest was Alicia Keys, 2 minutes and 35 seconds. I don't even remember it. She said it. She sat at her piano and played the national anthem, but I don't even remember. And it was see Super Bowl 48. I don't know what year that was. You'd have to look it up. I'm sorry, Super Bowl 47. So you can look that up. 50, 52, I think. It's either 51 or 52. It's coming up is this year. Anyway, average length for a national anthem at the Super Bowl is 1 minute 50 seconds, but she went 2 minutes 35. So yeah, yeah, she held those notes out for a really long time. So do what of that same Super Bowl? Yeah, isn't no, who is it this? Oh, it's huh? Rihanna. That's right. Okay. What now? For the Chiefs and Eagles. Yeah. 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 Oh, I love last year's, man. It was well basically it's Dr. Dre, but it was Snoop Dogg, it was Eminem. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No. No. Was it good? Okay. I don't even bother with the Grammys anymore. So, but the halftime show last year was awesome. We had like our own little dance parties in the house and stuff. But I couldn't even name a Rihanna song, so I will not be watching the halftime show this year. Who was the dude a couple years ago? Uh, no, no, no. It's a hip hop guy, and the people did the mask and stuff during his song. What's the weekend? Could not. I didn't even know who he was until they were doing commercials for the Super Bowl, and they're like, "Hey, his weekend's gonna be doing the halftime show." I'm like, it was awful. It was awful. Unless you like the weekend, but I like my weekends. I don't like the weekend. Did you get that? That's a dad joke right there, man. Yeah. I wish Declan was here because he can make a telling mark for me. Now, if he did a halftime show and brought back the stuff from the '80s, I'd be all over. Yeah, man. Okay, let's. We'll be done with Grammys and Super Bowls for now. Let's go to the Book of Joel. That's where we're at. So, yes. Speaking of halftime shows, Billy Joel's never done it. Um, was Billy Joel? I bet it was good. 1990. That's before River of Dreams. Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh yeah. That it's like a song full of history. Yeah. Okay, so Joel is wedged in between two other books that we've already gone through, Hosea and Amos. It's 3 chapters long. I don't know if you saw that this is where we were headed, so if you read it ahead of time, it shouldn't have taken you very long. And I'll be honest with you, like I was talking to Brandon ahead of time, like you got anything, in your notes and stuff over the years about Joel? And he's like, no. And I'm like, me either. So all I've ever really known about Joel is he talks about grasshoppers. He talks about locusts. That's really the only thing that I've ever really known about Joel. So this was good for me for this class to kind of dig in a little bit deeper and find out some things for myself. I will tell you ahead of time I was going to go through this just for me personally. So I'm giving you my personal assessment of Joel. It seems when you read through it a little disjointed. It's like here's this kind of the doom and gloom part, but then there's a good part, but then it goes back to doom and gloom, but then it's back to, to me it doesn't fit. But then there's other scholars I read and like, no, this matches up with this and this and this. And anyway, I hope I don't confuse you too much today. We're just kind of going to go through and see some of the major themes that he talks about, and then hopefully kind of tie a bow on it and make sense of it by the time we get done. So to start out with, one of the big things about Joel is that there's a lot of debate as to when it was actually written. Now we've been going through these minor prophets in what at least Brandon and I think is chronological order, and we've saved Joel kind of towards the end. We're light at the end of the tunnel. We've seen prophets prophesy against Israel, and we have seen Israel get taken away by the Assyrian Empire. We've seen prophets prophesy against Judah, and Judah has been taken away by the Babylonian Empire. And now, we talked about Obadiah a couple weeks ago, and that was after, everything that happened to Judah. So we're past the captivity, or getting out of the captivity of Judah. Those people were in Babylonian captivity for 70 years, and then a group of them got to come back to Jerusalem and start rebuilding the temple and rebuilding the walls. So that's kind of where we're at in history. However, a lot of scholars think Joel was way before this. Okay? And so the two major schools of thought are that it was written, and I'm going to try, and let me interrupt myself. I'm going to try not to Bible geek and Bible nerd too much on you guys today, because I know that a lot of y'all like, I don't care when it was written. So, so I'll try. Yeah, it was a long time ago, the end. But I think it helps, helps us understand the message if we have a clearer picture as to what's happening in society when the message is given. Okay, so there's some that think, it would be towards the end of the 800s BC. So let's say, I'm just an arbitrary number, around 835-ish BC. Okay? Now, if we go back in Israel and Judah's history, that is when Joash was going to be, or was the king in Judah. And if you don't remember much about that, Joash's dad was assassinated. He was the king. He was assassinated. Joash's grandma, Athaliah, just assumed power, just took over the throne. And she ended up slaughtering any other potential heirs. Her grandsons. She slaughtered all of them so that she could maintain the throne for herself. Well, somebody hid little Joash away, and they end up having a revolution and overthrowing her, and she is killed, and Joash becomes king when he is 7 years old. Okay? So, until he obviously gets to an age where he can actually reign as king, there were advisors, there were, judges and I guess elders that were ruling in his place until he became king. So you can go back in the book of 2 Kings and read through all of that. We won't take the time to do it today. But that is the time frame where a lot of people think that Joel was actually written, because Joel doesn't make any mention of kings or queens or rulers or anything like that in these 3 chapters. He talks about the leaders of the people, but he doesn't specifically mention any kings. And so there's people that point to that and say, well, that means there wasn't a king, and it would fit, Joash technically, he had the crown, but he wasn't reigning as king when he first came to the throne. So that's one reason for it. Another reason that people think of the earlier date is because Joel frequently uses the phrase the day of the Lord, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But that was used an awful lot by other prophets such as Amos and Hosea and Isaiah and some of these other guys who prophesied in the 700s, which is what we've talked about. So he would be closer to their time frame and using a lot of the same terminology as them. He mentions the enemies of God's people, but he doesn't mention Assyria or Babylon. He doesn't mention either one of those empires. And so, again, people think, well, those empires haven't flexed their muscles. They haven't started taking over countries yet. And so there would be no need for him to mention them. But he does specifically mention Philistia, where the Philistines lived, Tyre and Sidon, Edom. These were all countries that bordered around Israel and Judah that were constantly, having conflict with them. And so, since he mentions those enemies, but not Assyria and Babylon, there's people who are like, well, then this is an earlier time. Does that all make sense? Okay. And he also mentions a group of people called the Sabians, which is people from Sheba. Y'all remember the Queen of Sheba coming to visit Solomon? So the people of that area were called the Sabians, and he mentions them as well. So here's these countries that are mentioned in other parts of the Bible back in this earlier time. And so people were like, well, then Joel was written earlier, okay? Or Joel was written after Israel had been destroyed by the Assyrians, after Jerusalem had been destroyed by the Babylonians, after the people of Judah had been carried off to Babylon in captivity and had spent 70 years in captivity and are now getting to come back. So, again, I won't go too deep into the history, but if you get into the end of 2 Chronicles and you get into the book of Ezra, after the 70 years of the people of Judah being in Babylon in captivity, there's a group of them that gets come back when the Persian Empire is taken over. And Cyrus, who's the king of the Persian Empire, allows people from Judah to come back and start rebuilding the temple. And the guy named Zerubbabel is in charge of that. He's mentioned in the lineage of Jesus, just side note. But he leads a group back and they start rebuilding the temple. Now, when we get into our next prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, they prophesied during that time as well. And so there's people who are like, well, Joel is a contemporary of those guys. What he is prophesying about actually took place. He's talking to the group that has come back now and has started living in Judah and Jerusalem again. Does that make sense? Here's why. Joel did. Yeah. I mean, maybe somebody wrote his words down, but Yep. Yeah. No. It's his word. Whether he wrote them down as he was saying them, or somebody else wrote them down, but technically it's him. So in chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, it talks about the destruction of Judah and Jerusalem, but it talks about it like in almost in past tense. Let's see, in verse 2, there I will enter into judgment against them concerning my inheritance, my people Israel, for they scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land. They cast lots for my people and traded boys for prostitutes and sold girls for wine that they might drink. So that's talking in past tense. This is what happened to my people. And so there are scholars who go, well, then Joel is looking back on and talking about events that have already happened. So the destruction has already taken place. Now we're coming back again. Also, the nations, that he does talk about, the Philistines, the Sabians, the Edom, and Tyre and Sidon. Those nations, we talked about this with Obadiah too. Those nations were conquered by the Babylonians, but continued to still have a presence. The Edomites were conquered by the Babylonians. Actually, they were conquered by the Arabians during the Babylonian Empire, but they were still the Edomites. They kind of moved territory. The Sabians were around past Jesus' time, like all the way into the 5th and 6th century A.D. Tyre and Sidon, Alexander the Great was battling against those cities. So there was still a presence there, even though they had been conquered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians. They still had a presence. Does that make sense? And so he could still be talking about those people after the captivity is done. Another reason is that idol worship. All the prophets talk about what God is upset with and what He's needing to address. Idol worship was a common theme. Idol worship and social injustice, and those things aren't talked about in Joel. So maybe that's not an issue anymore. And if that's not an issue anymore, idol worship wasn't an issue anymore once the people of Judah got to come back from Babylonian captivity. That was not the concern that it had been before. Okay, and then he actually specifically mentions the Greeks in chapter 3 and verse 6. There's no other Old Testament prophet that mentions them, but he mentions them by name. In chapter 3 and verse 6, when he says, "You sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks that you might send them far from their homeland." And we don't have any evidence in the time of Joash and that time that the people of Judah and Israel even knew about the Greeks. There wasn't a whole lot of interaction as far as that goes, as far as we know. So it would make sense, as the Greeks were the ones that began to have battles with the Persian Empire as they were moving west and the Greeks started moving east, that it would make sense for it to be a later time that this was written, because Joel would have knowledge of who the Greeks were. Does that make sense? Okay. So, having said all that, in the grand scheme of things, does it really matter? Not necessarily. But really good arguments can be made for either. I'm personally leaning towards the late, which is why we're studying it now in our list of prophets that we've been going through. But, if you want to believe that it was written in the 800 BC instead of the 5 or 400s, fine. We can still be friends. I don't think it's that big of a deal breaker, because good arguments can be made for either. Joel's just one of those guys that, like, he says his name and then he starts talking. There's really no other indication about who he is, where he's from, what time he lived in, any of that kind of stuff. So it just kind of makes it difficult to know exactly, to pinpoint exactly what's going on. Because the other thing that he talks about a lot is locusts, and he describes this huge catastrophic event of these locusts, and you try to go back in history and find out, well, when was there a huge swarm of locusts that came through the land? Well, there were multiple times. It wasn't uncommon. The plague of locusts that God sent against Egypt, there were other times that there was a major locust infestation in that part of the world. And so it's kind of hard to even pinpoint exactly what Joel is talking about at this point. So most of his stuff it seems to be addressed to Israel. Again, there's no specific sins that are listed, or like idolatry or social injustice or sexual perversion or any other things that we've seen in some of the other prophets that we talked about. And so one of the big things that he addresses is like just a general lack of connection, lack of dedication to God, just in general. I'm living my life, and I got things that are more important to me than God is. That's kind of the overall issue that God seems to be addressing through Joel. Okay? Any questions so far? No, it's a yeah. Pethuel, nothing. As a matter of fact, I'm going to say this, but I might be wrong. But I think, if I remember right, that may even be the only time that particular name is mentioned in the Old Testament. It's just a random. It's almost like Joel's just this random guy, except God chose to speak through him, which is kind of cool. If you think about it, I mean, God has done that with several of the prophets that we talked about, right? Amos was a farmer, and God gave him a message. I mean, some of these guys had, Jeremiah was going to be a priest, and then God's like, no, you're going to preach. Joel seems to be one of these guys that just, I don't know that he had any specific prophetic training, as much as God just says, here's something that I need to tell my people, and you're going to be the one to tell them. So God can use any of us, right?
Does it say anywhere about how old he was?
We have no idea. All we know is there's a guy named Joel, and he said things that God told him to. That's really all we know. That's a little bit frustrating, but I'm just saying, like that's all there is. So,
That's what makes the prophets kind of difficult, though, too. Because at least with like Jonah, you've got these handles you can hold on to. It's like, oh yeah, that's the whale guy.
mm-hmm.
Or Hosea, and it's like, oh yeah, he marries a prostitute. You've got these things that you can
Yeah.
kind of hold on to. But some of these guys, and Joel being, it looks like the worst of them. Just like, there's just the guy.
Yeah.
And he's got words.
Could be an old guy, could be a young guy, could be married, could have kids, could be single. No idea. It's just a guy named Joel.
But the most important thing is everything that he says.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, it doesn't matter as much.
Yes. Okay, so all I'm going to do is just kind of give you just some of the highlights, all right? And this is not really in any particular order. These are just things that are important in the book of Joel. And then, like I said, at the end of this, I'll kind of tie it all, hopefully, together in a little bow, and you can take it apart on your own. Okay, first thing, I've already mentioned it once, but big thing about Joel is the locust, okay? And you can see him, he talks about it from the very get-go in verses 1 through 7. I'll start with verse 2. He says, "Hear this, you elders, listen, all you who live in the land. Has anything like this ever happened in your days or in the days of your forefathers? Tell it to your children, and let your children tell it to their children, and their children to the next generation. What the locust swarm has left, the great locusts have eaten. What the great locusts have eaten, the young locusts have eaten. What the young locusts have left, other locusts have eaten." Anybody got a footnote at the end of that, which says what? Yeah, that like it's the word locust, and then it's these other words, and they're like, we think it's different categories of locusts. We're not for sure. It may be different versions of locusts or some other bugs that came in after the locust did, but the locusts have come. Wake up, you drunkards, and weep. Wail, all you drinkers of wine. Wail because of the new wine, for it has been snatched from your lips. A nation has invaded my land, powerful and without number. Has the teeth of a lion, the fangs of a lioness. It has laid waste my vines and ruined my fig trees. It has stripped off their bark and thrown it away, leaving their branches white. So this is a devastating infestation of these bugs that have come in and basically stripped the land bare of vegetation. Crops are gone. Grapes are gone. Olives are gone. Grain is gone. It's just been picked dry. Okay? He goes on after this in different places, says, you know, the stubble is catching on fire because there's nothing left but just the stubble and the roots and everything has been picked clean. Okay? There's some people that think that this whole talk about locusts is just a metaphor for an actual army that has come through and destroyed the land. Could be true. Most scholars think that even if it is metaphorical, he's still pointing to an actual locust attack. So you know, apparently there was you know just a big swarm of locusts that came through. And verses skip down to verse 10 and 12. It talks about how widespread this infestation was. The fields are ruined, the ground is dried up, the grain is destroyed, the new wine is dried up, the oil fails. Despair, you farmers, wail, you vine growers, grieve for the wheat and the barley, because the harvest of the field is destroyed. The vine is dried up, the fig tree is withered, the pomegranate, the palm, and the apple tree, all the trees of the field are dried up. Surely the joy of mankind is withered away. Can you, Brandon? Can you text Griffin real quick and see if he needs me for something? Because he's calling me right now. Tell him I'm teaching class, but if I need to step out, I can. Thank you. So, I mean, you just see, especially with the agricultural community, like this is not just, you know, man, my garden didn't grow this year because the bugs got to it. This is completely a complete upheaval of the culture, the economy. This is what they rely on. These are the things that they need, not just for food, but for money. This is how they trade with other people. This is completely devastating their lives.
Could it be though that, verse 6 says, "The nation has invaded my
Mm-hmm.
So could he have been referring to the Babylonians,
For sure, and that's what some scholars think. Mm-hmm. That it was the armies that came in and destroyed it.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And they would have trampled things
Right,
down too.
right, and that's what that I'm saying. That's what some scholars see this just as a metaphor, and I'm looking at it as kind of a both and. I think there was an actual locust attack that was similar to, an army coming through and destroying everything as well. It is just basically saying God's people are in the middle of um, just desolation. Everything's been picked clean. Everything's been destroyed. Even in just kind of a little side note, in verse 9, he talks about how there's no grain for the grain offerings at the temple. There's no wine for the drink offerings. There's these. It's even interrupted how they worship God. That's how big a disruption there is. Okay, but he talks about in chapter 2. I won't read through the whole thing, but verses 1 through 10. Again, it's another description of this locust and or an army that's coming through and destroying everything. And I guess you could look at it from God's people's perspective, like, why is this happening? Why, especially if they've been in captivity for 70 years and have come back and are starting to rebuild, and God has allowed them, as he said he would, he's allowed them to come back home and start rebuilding the temple and start rebuilding their lives and being the people of God in the promised land once again. Why would this devastation happen? Why isn't God doing something? And the answer is, in chapter 2 and verse 11, y'all can look there real quick. It says, the Lord thunders at the head of his army. His forces are beyond number. Mighty are those who obey his command. The day of the Lord is great. It is dreadful. Who can endure it? Who is the person that is spearheading this? Who is the one that is causing the locusts? It's God. It's punishment. You're dealing with consequences here. And so there might be a tendency for God's people to go, man, sure wish God would rescue us. And Joel steps up and is like, no. God's doing this. God is allowing this to happen. You guys have gotten off track, and there's consequences to your choices, and these are part of those consequences. Does that make sense? In the moment where they might be, or even acting clueless, like, what in the world? Why are we going through this? And Joel's going, I'll tell you why. You're you're disconnected from God, and there's consequences of that. Does that all make sense?
Kind of like in Habakkuk, where he's like, "Why don't you do something?" And God's like, "I am." Like, oh no! Stop doing something.
Yeah, I am. I'm making it worse.
So if this was after the fall,
Mm-hmm.
if God's coming back, so they walked away again?
That's what I'm going to get to.
Again?
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, are they already in trouble again after they just got out of Babylonian captivity? Well, hold on to that. But quick answer, yeah. Yeah. Okay. The second. So we talked about locusts. Another key theme in Joel is the day of the Lord. He uses that phrase often. He's not the only person that does. It's mentioned by other prophets. It's mentioned by Amos. It's mentioned by Isaiah. And others. And we've talked about that. There's different opinions of what the day of the Lord actually means. When you see it in Old Testament prophecy, it's usually described the way that Joel describes it. It is a time of devastation and upheaval and destruction. And it comes across as God's vengeance, and it's probably overplaying a little bit. The day of the Lord is basically when God makes His presence known, and in some form or fashion, kind of alters. Can I say normal life at that time? We're just going to make a major shift. So, when you read through some of the other prophets and they talk about, and they're talking about the Babylonians coming or the Assyrians coming to destroy, and they talk about as that being the day of the Lord. Yeah, God is coming and is allowing destruction of his people to take place. It's a complete shift of here's the path that we're on, and now we're going to be annihilated by this other army. And that is God that is allowing that to happen. That's God that's pushing that forward. So he's making his presence and also causing a major shift to happen in the lives of his people. Okay? I think it's important to understand it in that concept, because sometimes the day of the Lord is a good thing. Sometimes it's when God shows up and makes a major shift. It's for his people's benefit. It's a blessing. Here's this destructive path we're on, and God's going to do something amazing to rescue us from it. Okay? But we, more often than not, when the Old Testament prophets talk about the day of the Lord, it's this kind of this negative connotation that it carries with it.
The New Testament, Jesus kind of changed that.
Mm-hmm.
Because now the Lord's Day, that's what my mom called it. She didn't say Sunday. She
Right,
said
the Lord's Day. I know my dad still does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, it changed the perception of it.
A good thing.
Yep. So, go ahead.
Did the day of the Lord, do you think that the Jews and the Israelites thought that, oh, it's okay because God's going to rescue me from whatever they were doing?
Sure.
And, I mean, it's kind of like, well, we can go ahead and do this because God will rescue us anyway.
I'm sure there were some people that thought that. Matter of fact, there were some of the other prophets that we looked at that address that. Like, don't have the confidence to say, "Oh, we're God's people. He's always going to take care of us." Jeremiah addressed that. I know we haven't talked about Jeremiah because we're doing minor prophets, but there were multiple times that Jeremiah was like, "You people are coming to the temple and acting like we're invincible because we're God's people. We got God's temple here. We can do what we want." And Jeremiah's like, "No, you can't. And there's going to be problems that come because of it." So yeah, there's sometimes a sense of invincibility, you know. Some people also want to take what Joel says here in describing the day of the Lord and attach it. Well, they connect it to, because it's some of the same language. It's in the book of Revelation, and so they kind of marry those two things together, and they talk about the day of the Lord being. Well, the day of the Lord being when Jesus comes back, but there's going to be a lot of destruction and annihilation and the tribulation that's going to happen on earth before Jesus comes back. I don't want to delve too deep into that today. I'm wanting you to know Joel is one of the places where they pull some of that from. Because look in chapter 2 and verse 31. When Joel is describing the day of the Lord, he says the sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Okay? If you go all the way over to Revelation, chapter 6. Should have marked it so I can get there sooner. Verses 12 and 13. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair, and the whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to the earth as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. So, same terminology that John uses to describe his vision, Joel used hundreds and hundreds of years before to describe the day of the Lord. And so people make that connection. Oh, Joel is talking about things that are happening right here, but ultimately he's talking about the awful suffering that Christians are going to go through before Jesus comes back and annihilates all the sinners and takes us all to heaven. Right? Okay. So, not that I've answered all the questions about the day of the Lord. I'm just saying the day of the Lord is big in Joel. All right? Any extra questions about that before I move on? Because I got to pick up my pace just a little.
In verse 31,
Uh-huh.
how did it describe the day of the Lord in your version? Before the coming
In chapter 2, in verse 31, the sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord.
Mine says great and awesome day of the Lord. So that kind of to me is a different.
Yeah,
Those two words are not interchangeable.
it is. That's a good question. It is a Hebrew word that, I mean, both those English words work, awesome or dreadful. It is something that is awe-inspiring, that could be negative that could be positive. It is something that just causes you like, because of how bad it is or because of how good it is. No, mine said dreadful. Hers said awesome. Yeah. That's the more.
What did yours say? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Right. Yeah, it's awesome. It rocks, man. Yes. Yeah. No, but even there's a couple of other places in our English translations where, enemy armies are described as awesome. But it just causes you to be, I guess, fully surprised and in awe of just how big and powerful whatever it is. Yes, positively or negatively. Yep. Good question. So get your pens ready. I'm going to say these to you, but we're not going to take the time this morning to read all of them. But Joel also, this is another theme. He quotes or has similar phrases to several other Old Testament prophets. Okay, you ready? Joel 1 verse 15 is the same thing that Isaiah says in Isaiah 13 verse 6. Chapter 2 verse 10 is the same as Isaiah 13 verse 10. Chapter 2, I skipped one. Chapter 2 verse 3 is the same as Isaiah 51 verse 3 and Ezekiel 36 verse 35. Am I going too fast? Okay. Chapter 3 verse 10. I want to come back to this in a second. 36, 35. Chapter 3 verse 10. He uses the same terminology that's in Isaiah 2 verse 4 and Micah 4 verse 3. Like I said, I'm going to come back to that one in a second. Chapter 3 verse 16. Have I done that one yet? Okay. Is the same as Amos chapter 1 verse 2 and Isaiah 13 verse 13. Chapter 3 verse 17 is the same as Ezekiel 36 verse 11 and Isaiah 52 verse 1. I got one more after this. And chapter 3 verse 18 is the same as Amos 9 verse 13. Now, on that last one, chapter 3 verse 18 is the same as Amos 9 verse 13. 115 was Isaiah 13 verse 6. Now, the reason I point that out to you, two reasons. One is, to me, again, this helps things lean towards a later date for this because he has such an awareness of things that God has said through these other prophets. He's read through these other prophets, and now he's living in a time after them, and is using some of the same terminology. Okay, Well, that's what some people would say, or I mean, he would be living pretty close to the same time as Amos, maybe a little bit before him. So, I mean, it's also God speaking to his people. So, can God use the same phrases to different? For sure. So, I understand all that too. But
one prophet also say, pretty good.
yeah, I'll use that too. But I think it's also important in that it lends some. Yes, that's a good word. Credibility to the accuracy. Like this really was a prophet of God that was really speaking, because it coincides with these other prophets that God used as well, and it is also just kind of puts a spotlight on, like, how we get frustrated having to tell our kids the same thing over and over again. I mean, that doesn't happen to us, but we have to do that for our kids, right? Just have to keep saying the same thing over and over again. And God had to do that with his children on a regular basis. I'm telling you the same thing. And sometimes, Brandon and I were talking about this recently. How many times did Jesus, with his disciples, had to say something, and then come back, a chapter or two later, and like, you remember I told you, and had to reiterate some things, and it just doesn't get through our brains sometimes. But anyway, it's just a unique thing to Joel that there's so many different prophets that he uses a lot of the same phrases and stuff. Okay, but I told you I was going to point out specifically the one from chapter 3 and verse 10. So in chapter 3, this is kind of the more positive thing for God's people, and basically saying all the devastation that you guys have gone through, God's going to restore you. He's going to make things better. He's also going to punish all these other nations that had something to do with your destruction, like they're going to get theirs, kind of thing. Okay, so that's kind of the theme of chapter 3. In the process of, in the middle of saying all that, he says in verse 10. I'll start in verse 9. Proclaim this among the nations. Prepare for war. Rouse the warriors. Let all the fighting men draw near and attack. Verse 10. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weakling say, I am strong. Come quickly, all you nations from every side, and assemble there. Bring down your warriors, O Lord. Now, I said that was similar to, it's not exactly, Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 4. Is anybody there already? If not, that's okay. I'll get there real quick. Because you may have heard this before. As a matter of fact, this is a verse that the Mennonites and some other groups like that kind of rely on. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4. And it's also Micah chapter 4 and verse 3. But look at what he says in verse 4. He will judge the nations. He will judge the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. You might see the difference. It is the opposite. He completely flipped it. Okay? So God, through Isaiah, says there's going to be a time when I will judge all the nations and we'll be done with war. And we'll take all of our instruments of war and we'll make them into instruments that cause growth and make good things happen. Instead of destroying things, we're going to grow things. We're going to build things. We're turning our swords into plowshares. We're turning our spears into pruning hooks. Okay? Joel, using the same phrasing, but he flips it. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Like, take the farm tools and make them into weapons instead of taking your weapons and making them into farm tools. Okay? Both of them, in both contexts, it's God. It's in the middle of God judging the nations and saying, "This is what we're going to do moving forward." But it's interesting that God, speaking through Joel, says, "No, there's going to be consequences. There's going to be destruction." Is God contradicting himself? Is God saying, he said in Isaiah, we're going to take weapons and make them into farm tools, and in Joel, we're going to take farm tools and make them into weapons. You're shaking your head no. What?
Different situations.
Different situation, different time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what you said from the pulpit on Sunday, right? There's a time for everything.
I did. That's right. It should be in Ecclesiastes. There's a time to beat plowshares into swords and a time to beat swords into plowshares.
Even in Revelation, it says, swing the sickle for the harvest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's using the same kind of imagery.
I totally agree. I think it's using imagery, and I think both things are true. I think God is sending a message of hope to his people, and part of that message is God's recognition. There's been bad stuff happening to you guys, and I've seen it. I've seen the destruction, and I'm going to handle it for you. I want to take care of these people who have been so abusive to you. they're going to suffer consequences. But then ultimately, what's going to be the final thing? There's not going to be any chaos. There's not going to be any conflict. We're all going to live at peace. And all these things that we used to fight over are not going to mean anything anymore. So I think both things can be true. I think both things are true. But it's interesting how Joel, or I guess God through Joel, uses the same words, but flips them, and both can be true. And so I just kind of a side note, I guess, if nothing else, I just wanted to point it out to you. It's an interesting thing in Joel. I got like 3 minutes. Okay, I can do this. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah, he's going to thunder from Jerusalem, but he's a place of safety too. Yeah. Yeah. But we need God to battle for us. We need God to go to battle for us. We pray for that, right? I mean, and he talks about, even in the New Testament, we need to put on armor. We need to defend ourselves. This is a fight. We have an enemy. He's going to fight for us. But there will come a time when we don't have the conflict anymore. The war is over. And we don't have to fight and scrap anymore. So I think both things are true. It's just interesting how the same tools and weapons are used in that way.
And what was the other one that you said at the same time?
Micah chapter 4. Micah 4 verse 3 is the exact same words as Isaiah 2 verse 4. Mm-hmm. So, but Micah and Isaiah both prophesied at the same time. So that would make sense. Okay, real quick. Acts chapter 2, when Peter, when the Holy Spirit comes on the new Christians and Peter preaches the first, what we call the first sermon, okay, he quotes from Joel, all right? So we'll look at Acts 2 in just a second. Look at Joel chapter 2. Begin in verse 28 as he's describing the day of the Lord. Afterward, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days. I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. For on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be deliverance, as the Lord has said, among the survivors whom the Lord calls. Okay, you got that? Flip over to Acts chapter 2, or scroll over or click over to Acts chapter 2. As Peter is preaching, and people are like wondering why these guys who have never been outside of the area of Galilee and Judah can speak all these foreign languages, and Peter's like, no, this is the Holy Spirit. And the reason the Holy Spirit has come on us is because this is the day of the Lord. This is, Jesus was crucified. He was raised again. He's gone back to heaven. And now God has poured out His Holy Spirit on us. Okay, so look at verse 16. This is what was spoken of by the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. I will show wonders in the heaven above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness, the moon to blood, before the coming of the great and glorious day of the Lord. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And he goes on from there and says, that's Jesus, and that's the Holy Spirit, and this is the day of the Lord. Now, real quick, there's a significant difference in Joel 2 verse 31 and Acts 2 verse 20, and the adjectives that are used to describe the day of the Lord, which Lou has already brought up. 2:20. Yeah, so when Joel describes it, he describes it as what? As dreadful, great and dreadful, or awesome. In Acts? Yeah. Yeah, ESV. So in Acts is great and glorious, or what is yours? Great, great and magnificent. Much more positive spin, isn't it? Okay. Now, are both true? Absolutely. But in Joel's time, in Joel's mind, this God revealing His presence is not a thing to look forward to, because He's bringing consequences. He is pouring out His Spirit into their lives in a, I guess, almost in a hurtful way, but not trying to injure, but just there's consequences to your choices. There's punishment for what you've been doing. The day of the Lord, from Peter's perspective, God is making His presence known, right? He is pouring His Spirit out in a way that hasn't been before. Is there a major shift in the lives of these people? Absolutely. It's the day of the Lord. But it is a glorious thing. It is a magnificent thing. It's a beautiful thing, because it's God coming to His people not to bring consequences, but to bring freedom and to bring hope and to bring His intimate presence. And that's what Peter is. That's why Peter uses this scripture. He's talking to a whole bunch of Jewish people who know Joel's words. They remember that prophecy. They've gone to church since they were kids. They knew what the day of the Lord was supposed to be like. And Peter's like, no, you're witnessing it. It is the day of the Lord, but it's nothing to be feared. It's awesome. It's glorious. It is God's presence, not coming in a fearful way, but in a beautiful way, to be with His people. Does that make sense? So it's a really cool thing about Joel as well. All right. If you got to go, you got to go. It's cool. This is the last thing. I think, and Daisy, you can write this down later, but I think chapter 2 and verse 13 is the key verse to Joel. So this is, I'm tying a bow on it, and then we'll stop the feed after this, Brandon. Chapter 2, verse 13 is what the whole reason that God is speaking to His people through Joel. Okay? In verse 12, it says, even now declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning. Verse 13, rend your heart, not your garments. Return to the Lord, for He is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love, and He relents from sending calamity. Now, if this was written back during the time of Joash and some of the other kings, there was idol worship. And I mean, Athaliah had slaughtered her own family and had slaughtered priests and had set up idol worship, and things were bad. And so it would make sense for God to tell His people at that time, hey, you need to repent. You need to turn from what you've been doing. You need to come before me with mourning and sorrow. But it also, going back to your question earlier, Paulette, it applies to the people who had come back to rebuild the temple. Because if you read through Ezra, these people who had been in captivity for 70 years because of disconnecting themselves from God, come back to rebuild the temple to try to connect with God once again, and almost immediately are doing some of the things that got them in trouble in the first place. They're intermarrying with people outside, non-Israelites, which is what got them in trouble hundreds of years before, because that's where the idol worship started. They're already cheating each other. The people who have more money and more power are already looking down on the poor people, even though they're all kind of in the same boat. We've all been displaced from our home. We come back home again, but there's already people taking advantage of each other and mistreating each other, and all the things that all the prophets for a few hundred years before the captivity have warned God's people about, and he allowed them to be destroyed and taken away, and now they're starting to do it again. They're starting to repeat the behavior again. So yeah, it applies to both. Whichever date you pick, it still fits. But here's the thing. This is what stands out to me about what he says here in verse 13. Rend your heart, not your garments. What does that mean? Okay. In the Old Testament times, you see it all the time. When someone was in mourning, when someone was distraught, they got really bad news, whatever it was, what did? They tore their garments. I am visibly showing that I am in mourning, that I am in shock, that I am distressed by either what I have been doing or what has happened to me. Okay? What's the potential problem in doing that?
You sit in it.
Well, not only that you sit in it, but you can be doing it as a show. Look how sad I am. And you'd be dramatic. I'm so sorrowful, and I'm ripping clothes. And it could almost be an act. And so, what does God say to his people here? Rend your heart. This needs to be from the core. It's not that God is against rending the garments, but I'm not so concerned about what you look like on the outside. What is God most concerned with? From the inside. We can feign repentance, can't we? We can fake apologies. I mean, we can do that with each other. We can do that with God. God's like, I want to get to the core of this. And not only do I want to get to your heart, I want you to tear that open. Whatever else it is that has a hold of your heart, let's tear that away. And let's start over. Okay? And if you read through the book of Joel with that, through that lens, I think that helps it all make sense. There's destruction. It is coming from God because of bad choices these people have been making. But there's hope. But the hope is dependent on my willingness to tear off all this stuff that I've chosen to hold on to. And that I've allowed to take control of my heart instead of God. And I've got to tear that stuff away. Does that make sense?
Isn't that one of our songs? Break My Heart, Lord?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was trying
Yeah, break my heart. And just again, because we're already past time, when he says after that, rend your heart, not your garments, return to the Lord, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love, and he relents from sin and calamity. Those are the exact same words that God said about himself on Mount Sinai to Moses.
That verse.
Right after, word for word.
Yeah, and that verse is the most quoted verse in the whole Bible.
Oh, is that right?
Over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah, he says it multiple times. Yeah, but that's where he said it first, was right after the golden calf. Right after his people who had said, you're going to be our God. Nah, wait, we'll worship that God instead. God could have destroyed him. God actually kind of wanted to destroy him and said, I'll start over with you, Moses. And then Moses talks him out of it and he relents. God, from the very beginning with his people, has showed his compassion, his graciousness, and his willingness to forgive. And hundreds of years later, he's still saying the same thing. It's part of who he is. It's part of his DNA. And so he tells his people, man, let's tear off this other stuff and be focused on me. Because I've always been who I am. There's more we can talk about, but we're out of time. All right? So that's Joel in a nutshell. So we'll go ahead and end the live stream. Thank you guys for joining us online. If anybody else got questions or comments afterwards, feel free to stick around. If you got, I guess they can put comments on there too, if they want to.